We are not a democracy. We have never been a democracy. And the people yelling, "Save our democracy," the loudest have apparently never read the document they are supposedly saving. By Mike Borowski at bskimike22802 on X and YouTube. Bski's Classroom. I teach science, anatomy, physics. I stand in front of teenagers every single day and correct things everyone knows that are completely, factually, embarrassingly wrong. And I have to tell you, after doing this for over 2 decades, nothing has the staying power of a bad idea that got into a textbook. We are a democracy. There it is. The most confidently repeated civic myth in American history. Politicians say it, pundits say it. People put it in their social media bios, tattoo it on their souls, build their entire political identity around defending it. And it has never been true. Not for one day, not for 1 hour. The United States of America has never been a democracy. And before you type "same thing," sit down. We need to have a real conversation. Let me introduce you to the difference between an adjective and a noun. I know. Grammar, bear with me. This matters. Democratic is an adjective. It describes something. It modifies a noun. It tells you what something is like. Democracy is a noun. It is something. It names a specific form of government where the majority rules directly. The people vote on the laws themselves. 51% decides everything, and the will of the crowd is the law of the land. Now, republic is also a noun. It names a different form of government, one where the people elect representatives, who then govern within the boundaries of a founding document. Here is where everyone's brain short circuits. A republic can use democratic processes, elections, voting, representation, without being a democracy. The process is not the government. The adjective is not the noun. A fast car is still a car, not a fast. A quiet library is still a library, not a quiet. And a republic that uses democratic processes is still a republic, not a democracy. The word that correctly describes how a republic operates is constitutional, not democratic. The Constitution governs this republic, not the people's current opinion. And that distinction is not trivial. It is everything. Your teacher was wrong. And that is not a criticism, it is science. I say this with genuine empathy because I am a teacher and I know exactly how this happens. Teachers are human beings who are taught by other human beings. When a myth gets into a curriculum and stays there long enough, it becomes common knowledge. And common knowledge does not get questioned. It just gets passed down, generation after generation, with complete confidence. A major review of 12 middle school physical science textbooks, books used by approximately 80% of American students, found hundreds of documented errors. Hundreds. Across Pearson, Glencoe, McGraw-Hill, Prentice Hall, and Holt. Not a typo, hundreds. So before anyone feels personally attacked for believing something their teacher told them, understand, it was in print, it had a publisher's logo on it, and it was approved by a state curriculum board. Here's a sampling. There is no gravity in space. Astronauts float because gravity stops existing up there. Publishing elementary astronomy readers. Gravity extends infinitely. Astronauts are in continuous freefall. The ISS is being pulled toward Earth every second. It just keeps missing because it is moving sideways fast enough. That is orbit. Deoxygenated blood is blue until it contacts oxygen in the air. Go look at your blue veins. Pearson Interactive Physical Science Teacher's Edition, which told teachers to point students to their blue veins as proof. Blood is always red, oxygenated or not. Albert Einstein failed math as a child, repeated in countless educational materials. He excelled at math. Someone misread a Swiss grading scale where 6 is the top score, reversed it, and printed it. You only use 10% of your brain, never sourced from neuroscience. Ever. Chameleons change color to camouflage. They change color primarily to communicate mood and regulate temperature. Airplane wings create lift solely through the Bernoulli principle. Prentice Hall series. Incomplete. Does not explain inverted flight. Newton's first law was misstated in multiple textbooks simultaneously. Hubris. NC State Review, 2001. One book placed the equator through the middle of Texas on a map of the Earth. And a photo of singer Linda Ronstadt was labeled as a silicon crystal in a science textbook that passed peer review. All false. Not fringe materials. Major publishers. Millions of students. Decades of classrooms. We Are a Democracy belongs in that exact same pile. It is in the Glencoe McGraw-Hill civics text. It has been in the curriculum long enough that correcting it feels like a personal attack to the people who built an identity around it. It is not an attack. It is just biology class. The test is coming and the answer is wrong. Since we are talking about what your textbook got wrong, let us spend a moment on what it did to American history. Because this is where it stops being embarrassing and starts being consequential. Slavery is one of the most important chapters in American history. It shaped this country in ways we are still untangling. And the way American history textbooks have handled it for generations has been, to put it charitably, a masterpiece of selective editing. James Loewen spent years analyzing 12 major high school U.S. history textbooks, books like The American Tradition, Triumph of the American Nation, and The Challenge of Freedom from Glencoe, McGraw-Hill. What he found was not one or two errors. It was a systematic pattern of what gets included, what gets left out, and what gets softened into something unrecognizable. Here is what students were, and in many cases still are, taught, and why it is incomplete. That virtually all Africans in America were slaves. That is not accurate. By 1860, approximately 488,000 free Black Americans lived in the United States. Some owned property, some ran businesses, some were educators. The complete erasure of free Black history from the slavery section of American history texts does a disservice to everyone. It reduces a complex, multi-generational community to a single legal status, and it buries the history of Black Americans who were never enslaved. That slaves were brought to America as if the United States was the center of the transatlantic slave trade. The United States received approximately 4 to 6% of all Africans transported in the transatlantic slave trade. Brazil received roughly 40%, the Caribbean received 30 to 40%. None of this context appears in the standard US History Survey course, leaving students with a wildly distorted picture of the scale and geography of the trade. That enslaved people were sold exclusively by white European men. Coastal African kingdoms sold captives, often war prisoners and debtors, to European buyers at coastal forts. Both the African sellers and the European buyers bear moral responsibility for what the trade produced. Textbooks have historically avoided this complexity. The problem is that avoiding the complexity also erases the agency of the people involved and replaces history with a simplified morality play. That Reconstruction was a chaotic era of corruption and Black political overreach that needed to be redeemed. The actual history. Reconstruction governments built public school systems in the South for the first time. Black elected officials during Reconstruction were, by historical measure, often more effective at governance than what came after them. What ended Reconstruction was organized terrorist violence from groups like the KKK, combined with a federal government that eventually decided it was no longer politically convenient to protect Black citizens in the South. That second part, rarely in the textbook. And then there is the Black family. In 1960, before the Great Society expansion of the welfare state, approximately 78% of Black children were raised in two-parent households. Thomas Sowell has cited this census data extensively. By the 1980s and 1990s, that number had inverted. Sowell argues, with data, that the architecture of post-1960 welfare policy, specifically rules that made benefits contingent on the absence of an employed father in the household, created powerful financial incentives that worked against family formation. The same government that claimed to be helping the Black community was simultaneously designing a system that, predictably and measurably, undermined Black family stability. That is not in the textbook. The same pattern that gave us "We Are a Democracy" in civics class gave us an incomplete, selectively edited version of American racial history in history class. And in both cases, the people who try to fill in the gaps get accused of being the problem. Funny how that works. What James Madison said, the guy who actually wrote the thing. Federalist number 10, published November 22nd, 1787. Written by James Madison, one of the primary architects of the Constitution, fourth president of the United States, and a man who had spent considerably more time thinking about this than the average cable news panelist. Madison wrote that democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. That is not exactly a ringing endorsement of the thing everyone is currently demanding we save. He then made the distinction explicit. A pure democracy is where citizens assemble and administer the government in person. A republic is where they act through representatives. Different things, Madison said. Categorically different, not interchangeable. Not two words for the same idea. Alexander Hamilton backed him up in Federalist number 9, celebrating legislative balances and checks as the specific safeguards against tyranny, not just the tyranny of kings, but also the tyranny of unchecked majorities. The entire architecture was designed to prevent any single faction from wielding absolute power. That is the opposite of what a pure democracy does. And then there is John Adams' 1814. Democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. The founders were not ambivalent about this. They were not on the fence. They had read their history, Polybius, Thucydides, the fall of Athens, the implosion of the Roman Republic, and they deliberately, consciously, architecturally built something different. They called it a republic, on purpose. Since you need a concrete example of what democracy actually produces, let me introduce you to Socrates. Socrates, 469 BC to 399 BC, one of the greatest philosophical minds in human history, father of Western thought, teacher of Plato, the man whose method of reasoning still shapes how we teach critical thinking today. Killed by democracy, not by a tyrant, not by a king, not by a military coup, by a democratic vote. The citizens of Athens, the city that gave us democracy, held a vote, 501 jurors, simple majority. And by a vote of 280 to 221, they sentenced Socrates to death because his ideas made the majority uncomfortable. That is democracy in its purest form. That is what majority rules looks like when there are no constitutional constraints on what the majority can do. You could vote a man to death because you did not like what he was teaching your children. And it was perfectly legal because the sole standard of right and wrong was the count of the votes. Socrates knew they were wrong. He said so. He refused to escape even when he had the chance. And his reason was heartbreaking. The majority had the legal right to execute him, even if they were morally wrong to do it. He accepted the sentence. Not because it was just, because it was the logical outcome of the system. The founders read this story. All of them. They understood exactly what it meant. And they built something with constitutional constraints on what the majority could do to the individual precisely because of examples like this one. Now let me tell you about Rome. The Roman Republic lasted nearly 5 centuries. It had a Senate, it had representation, it had checks and balances. And then, and here's the part that should keep you up at night, the Romans voluntarily gave it up. No foreign invasion destroyed the Roman Republic. The Roman people traded their republic for an empire because an emperor promised them safety, security, stability. Government guaranteed equality and protection. Sound familiar? It happened gradually, then suddenly. Julius Caesar was assassinated by senators who saw what was coming, and it still happened. The people wanted comfort more than they wanted freedom. They surrendered rights built over generations in exchange for the promise that someone powerful would take care of them. And then, a few generations later, the wrong emperor took power, and everything was gone. Because once you give up the constitutional framework, you cannot just vote it back. The ideas that protected you are gone. The document that constrained the government is gone, and you are left with whatever the man in charge decides to give you. Benjamin Franklin understood this. On the last day of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, a woman outside the State House asked him what kind of government the delegates had created. Franklin did not say, a democracy. He said, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. Very old, very wise, and more relevant today than it has ever been. Still not convinced? Let me tell you about Bodie McBoatface. I want to be fair. I want to steelman the democracy argument. Maybe Socrates was an outlier. Maybe Rome was a one-time exception. Maybe 2,400 years of recorded history does not tell us anything useful. So let me give you a modern example, a low-stakes one. No death sentences, just a boat. In 2016, the United Kingdom's Natural Environment Research Council was commissioning a brand new £200 million polar research vessel. They launched a public naming competition, open poll. Most votes wins. Suggestions poured in, scientific names, historical names, names honoring great British explorers. The poll was going beautifully, and then the internet found it. Within days, someone submitted Bodie McBoatface. It exploded across social media. When the poll closed, Bodie McBoatface had received approximately 124,000 votes. It demolished every serious alternative. The democratic will of the British public had spoken with extraordinary clarity. The government ignored it. After considerable hand-wringing, the agency named the ship RRS Sir David Attenborough and gave the Bodie McBoatface name to a small autonomous underwater submarine attached to the ship. And here is the thing, they were right to ignore it. The entire point was a serious scientific research vessel representing decades of British scientific investment to the world. Most votes wins, no guardrails, produce a result that served none of those purposes. This is what happens in pure, unguarded democracy at low stakes. Nobody died. The research ship got a dignified name, science continued, and we all got a wonderful story. But scale that up. Make the stakes real. Put someone's rights on the line. Put someone's livelihood, their property, their liberty, their ability to worship, their freedom of speech inside that poll. Now, do you want the majority to decide? Think about every televised talent show you have ever watched. American Idol, The Voice, Dancing with the Stars. The audience votes. And on every single one of those shows, producers maintain veto power. Judges have authority over the process. Because the people who designed the show knew that unlimited audience voting, with no professional filter, would occasionally produce results that serve entertainment value less than raw popularity does. Your favorite talent show has more structural safeguards than a pure democracy would. Madison called that faction. He warned about it in 1787. He was right then. Bodie McBoatface proves it now. A republic. If you can keep it, and then there is Black Mirror. Fiction. Except it is not really fiction anymore. I want to take a short detour into television. Bear with me. There is a reason this is relevant. Black Mirror is a British anthology series. Each episode a standalone story set in the near future, where some aspect of current technology has been taken to its logical extreme. The whole point of the show is that nothing in it is impossible. It is not science fiction in the Star Wars sense. It is a very uncomfortable mirror held up to where we are already going. One episode in particular is worth your time. Season 2, Episode 3, The Waldo Moment. Here is the setup. A struggling comedian performs as a character called Waldo, a foul-mouthed, irreverent, animated blue bear who humiliates establishment politicians on a late-night show. One clip goes viral. A producer sees an opportunity. Why not run Waldo as a candidate in a local election? So they do. And Waldo has no policies. None. Zero. Just rage, trolling, and a talent for making arrogant politicians look ridiculous. And the public loves it because the public is exhausted. Exhausted by scripted politicians who say nothing, promise everything, and deliver less. Waldo, at least, feels honest, authentic, real. The producer makes the actual argument for pure digital democracy. Why do we need representatives at all? Everyone has a smartphone. Just put every issue online. Thumbs up, thumbs down. That is actual democracy. Let the people decide directly on everything, all the time. The comedian pushes back. He asks what happens when the top voted issue on the internet at any given moment is whatever the algorithm served up that morning. The producer does not have an answer because the argument sounds great and collapses immediately when you apply reality to it. Waldo does not win, but he comes in a strong second, and the coda, set some time later, shows a surveillance state where Waldo-like figures have taken over globally. Not through careful governance, not through deliberate policy, through the pure momentum of anti-establishment energy that was never connected to any coherent idea of what to build after tearing everything down. The episode was considered underwhelming when it aired in 2013. People called it heavy-handed, too on the nose. And then 2016 happened. And then the years after 2016 happened. And suddenly, it is the most prescient thing on television. The other episodes hit similar notes from different angles. Hated in the Nation features robotic bees hacked to execute whoever receives the most hashtag votes in a social media campaign. Millions of people choosing a daily victim through the friction-free mechanism, a trending hashtag, none of them believing it is real, all of them doing it anyway. By the time the consequences are obvious, the mob is too large and too anonymous to stop. Nosedive imagines a world where every human interaction is rated on a 5-star app that determines your housing, your job, your social access. A permanent popular referendum on your worth as a person, running 24 hours a day with no appeals process. White Bear turns punishment itself into a public spectacle, a theme park where a convicted criminal is forced to relive terror daily while paying audiences film it on their phones and cheer. In every one of these stories, the mechanism is the same. Give the majority direct, frictionless, consequence-free power over the individual. Remove the constitutional constraints. Remove the deliberative process. Remove the institutional filter between the crowd's impulse and the outcome, and watch what happens. What happens is always the same thing. The founders could have written the episode summaries. Madison's warning about the violence of faction in Federalist Number 10 is not a historical abstraction. It is a pattern that repeats across every culture, every century, every medium, from the Athenian jury that killed Socrates, to the Roman crowd that cheered the end of the Republic, to the Venezuelan majority that voted away its own Congress, to the British internet that named a research vessel Bodie McBoatface, to a fictional television audience that voted an animated bear into political relevance. The founders did not need Black Mirror. They had the history of Athens. The result is the same. A constitutional republic with deliberate constraints on what the majority can do to the individual is not the enemy of the people. It is the only thing that has ever reliably protected them from themselves. The Constitution does not contain the word democracy, not even once. Go look, right now. I will wait. The word democracy appears in the United States Constitution exactly 0 times. 0. Not in the preamble, not in Article 1, not in Article 2, not in the Bill of Rights, not tucked away in some obscure amendment. Nowhere. The word republic, however, appears in Article 4, Section 4. The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government, not democratic, republican. And while you have that search function open, check the Declaration of Independence too. Go ahead, search for democracy. You will not find it there either. The document that launched this country does not contain the word democracy, not once. What it does contain are unalienable rights, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, rights that are endowed by our Creator, which means they exist before government does, which means no government and no democratic majority has the authority to vote them away. Mark Levin put it simply, if you believe in pure democracy, you reject the Declaration of Independence. Because the Declaration is about individual rights that the majority cannot touch. Pure democracy says the majority rules. The Declaration says there are things the majority simply does not get to decide. Those two ideas are incompatible. Pick one. And while we are doing this exercise, go look up the Pledge of Allegiance. The one children say every morning in classrooms across this country, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. Not the democracy for which it stands, the republic. This has been the pledge since 1892. Children have been saying republic every single morning for well over a century. And somehow we still have adults walking around insisting we live in a democracy. The people who wrote this country chose one word and not the other, deliberately, across the Constitution, across the Declaration, and embedded into the daily pledge they wrote for school children. That is not a coincidence. That is a choice. We do not vote for president. Most people do not actually know this. When you walk into a voting booth and cast your ballot for president, you are not voting for the president. You are voting for a slate of electors, delegates, representatives assigned to your state, who then, and only then, cast the actual votes for president in the Electoral College. The President of the United States is chosen by the Electoral College, not by national popular vote, not by whoever gets the most ballots nationwide, by electors. This was designed to prevent exactly what Madison warned about. In a pure democracy, 5 or 6 densely populated metropolitan areas would elect every president forever, and the other few 100 million Americans scattered across the rest of the country could participate in a charming but completely irrelevant national exercise. The Electoral College requires presidential candidates to build geographically diverse coalitions to actually go win states, plural, across different regions. It is not broken. It is doing precisely what it was designed to do. People who want to abolish it know this. That is exactly why they want to abolish it. We do not vote on laws either. Not a single one. In a true democracy, the people vote on legislation directly. Every law goes to the population. The majority decides. Done. We do not do that. We elect representatives who vote on laws in our name. And those representatives are constrained by a document that limits what even the most overwhelming majority can legally do. Your rights are not subject to a popular vote. A unanimous public opinion cannot strip them from you. The Constitution exists specifically to prevent that. That is what constitutional means in constitutional republic. The Constitution is supreme. It overrides legislation. It overrides executive orders. It overrides popular opinion. Even when 90% of the country wants something, if the Constitution prohibits it, it does not happen. Not without going through the most deliberately difficult process the founders could design. Here's the argument that ends the conversation. Article 5. Some people hear all of this and still land on, well, maybe we are a democratic republic. At least the republic part is right. I appreciate the partial credit, but I want to show you exactly why democratic republic still does not hold up. Because this is the argument that nobody has an answer for. If democratic accurately described how this republic is governed at its core, then the democratic will of the people would be the controlling authority over the structure of the republic itself. Majority rules, 51% wants a change, 51% gets a change. So Let's say 51% of Americans tomorrow want to change how electoral votes are allocated, or abolish the Senate, or eliminate the Electoral College. They've got the numbers. Simple majority. Democracy in action. Can they do it? They cannot. Not even close. Article 5 of the Constitution is the only legal mechanism for changing this government structure. And Article 5 requires a 2/3 vote of both chambers of Congress. Not a simple majority, 2/3, followed by ratification by 3/4 of the state legislatures. That is 38 of 50 states. Think about that. 60% of the population cannot do it. 70% cannot do it. You could have overwhelming national consensus and still not have enough states aligned to ratify an amendment. The democratic will of the majority is explicitly, structurally, constitutionally blocked from rewriting the rules without clearing an extraordinarily high bar. Why? Because the Constitution governs this republic. Not polls, not elections, not however many people sign a petition or show up to a march or post about it online. The Constitution. Constitutional is doing all the real work in that phrase. If you want to call us a democratic republic, you have to explain why it takes 38 states to change the rules. Because that is not democracy. That is a constitutional framework that the majority cannot simply override. And a government whose structure cannot be changed by majority vote is not being governed democratically at its core. It is being governed constitutionally, which is, not coincidentally, exactly what we call it. So why does everyone keep saying our democracy? Because it works, rhetorically, emotionally. Our democracy is under threat, generates a completely different neurological response than our constitutional procedural norms are being incrementally tested. One makes your heart rate go up. The other makes your eyes glaze over. Politicians understand this. They are not confused about what form of government we have. They are deliberately using the wrong word because it is more effective. Quinn's Law number 6. Facts are the enemy of liberalism. And this fact in particular, that we are a constitutional republic whose structure cannot be changed by simple majority vote, is deeply inconvenient for people who want to pack the Supreme Court, abolish the Electoral College, eliminate the Senate filibuster, and fundamentally restructure the government based on whatever the current popular sentiment happens to be. If we are a democracy, majority rules, and all of those changes become philosophically justifiable. If we are a constitutional republic, the Constitution constrains what even elected majorities can do, and suddenly all of those structural changes require going through Article 5, which was designed to be very, very hard. The word choice is not accidental, it is strategic. You want to see what pure democracy produces in the modern world? Look at Venezuela. Venezuela, once the richest country in South America, largest proven oil reserves on the planet, a functioning country with actual resources and actual wealth. Then Hugo Chavez happened, then Nicolas Maduro. And what did Maduro do when he needed to consolidate power? He held a vote, a quick popular vote to eliminate the legislative branch, their version of Congress, and replace it with one packed entirely with his own supporters. He called it democracy. The people voted. Majority decided. Done. He now controls the judiciary. He controls the legislature. He is rewriting the Constitution to give himself whatever he wants next. Opposition leaders are being thrown in prison. And the people, the same people who voted for this, are going to city dumps at night to find something to eat. Dogs, cats, whatever they can find. The grocery store shelves are empty. A country with the largest oil reserves in the world cannot get gasoline. This is not an accident. This is not bad luck. This is the logical endpoint of what happens when you have unlimited majority rule with no constitutional constraints on government power. Rome surrendered its republic gradually for the promise of safety and equality. Venezuela did it faster. The method changes. The result does not. The founders saw this pattern across every civilization they studied. The Greeks, the Romans, the Babylonians. Every great empire that fell, the common thread was always the same. Once you give people the promise of government-guaranteed equality in exchange for individual liberty, the government grows, the liberty shrinks, and eventually someone with enough power decides the Constitution is impractical and ill-suited for modern conditions, and the whole thing collapses into whatever one man decides to make of the wreckage. A republic, if you can keep it. Franklin said it the day the Constitution was signed. He knew exactly how this ends if you stop paying attention. One more thing. The party screaming, "Save our democracy," the loudest does not actually practice it. I want to be specific. I want names and dates, because this is a classroom and vague assertions do not earn credit. Kamala Harris became the 2024 Democratic presidential nominee without receiving a single presidential primary vote. 0. Not a small number. 0. Joe Biden withdrew from the race, and the party immediately coronated her. No competitive primary, No debates between candidates, no process by which Democratic voters chose her. The party announced its nominee the way a committee announces a hire. This is the party that holds weekly press conferences about protecting democracy. And it was not even the first time. In the 2020 primary, Hillary Clinton had 400 plus superdelegates, party insiders, lobbyists, DNC officials, committed before a single primary vote was cast anywhere in the country. The media reported her delegate lead as mathematically insurmountable from day one. Then, the DNC's internal emails leaked. Debbie Wasserman Schultz resigned. A CNN contributor simultaneously serving as a DNC official admitted she fed debate questions to the Clinton campaign in advance. The party absorbed the scandal and moved on. During the 2025 government shutdown, Democrats voted 14 times to reject clean continuing resolutions that would have reopened the government. During those 14 votes, 42 million SNAP recipients had benefits in limbo. Active duty military were in paycheck uncertainty during an active military operation. Air traffic controllers worked without pay. And Senator Schumer voted no 14 times. This is the same man who voted for clean continuing resolutions 29 consecutive times before this shutdown. On the record in 2018, he described Republicans refusing to come to the table to negotiate a bipartisan continuing resolution. Nancy Pelosi, 2018, we are not hostages to your wall. Reopen the government. Barack Obama, 2013, you do not get to demand a ransom for doing your job. The principle disappeared the instant they were the ones holding the lever. The SAVE Act, which simply requires proof of United States citizenship to register to vote in federal elections, polled at 80% national support, including a majority of registered Democratic voters. Their own voters wanted it. Every Senate Democrat voted no, unanimous. And when the ballot box looked uncertain in 2024, Democrats in Colorado, Maine, and Illinois attempted to remove the Republican presidential candidate from state ballots, something that had never been attempted in the 156-year history of the 14th Amendment. The Supreme Court rejected it 9-0. They call us the threat to democracy. Quinn's Law number 2. If you want to know what liberals are up to, pay attention to what they accuse conservatives of doing. Look at what they have done to their own. One question. Just one. Next time someone tells you America is a democracy, ask them this. If we are a democracy, why does it require 2/3 of Congress and 3/4 of the states to change the rules? That is it. That is the whole question. If majority rules, why is the threshold for constitutional change set so deliberately, so intentionally, so impossibly above a simple majority? They will not have an answer, because there is no answer that is consistent with calling us a democracy. The answer only makes sense if you understand that the Constitution governs this republic, not the democratic will of whoever has 51% on a Tuesday. The founders were not stumbling into this. They studied every republic and every democracy in recorded history, the Greeks, the Romans, the Babylonians, the Chinese, the British, and they saw the same pattern every single time. Unlimited majority rule without constitutional constraints always ends the same way. Either mob tyranny or the surrender of rights to a strongman who promises safety in exchange for freedom. They built something specifically, carefully, and deliberately designed to prevent that. They gave us a document that governs the government, a constitution that even the most popular leader cannot override, a republic that does not depend on good people always being in charge, because Madison knew they would not always be. He said so explicitly. Venezuela did not have that. The moment Maduro held his democratic vote to eliminate the legislature, there was nothing left to stop him. Rome gave up its constraints voluntarily. Venezuela gave up its constraints through democracy. In both cases, the ideas that protected the people were gone. A republic, madam, if you can keep it, we have kept it. So far. Maybe, and I say this with the full warmth and sincerity of someone who has been correcting avoidable, factual errors for 20 years, maybe spend a little less time defending a word you do not understand and a little more time learning about the document that has kept this country free for nearly 2.5 centuries. It is a genuinely extraordinary piece of work. It deserves to be called by its actual name. But what do I know? I am only a science teacher who has spent 2 decades watching people say, "our democracy," every morning, while their kids recite "to the republic for which it stands" in the next room. Which is a kind of irony that does not require a PhD to appreciate, just the willingness to pay attention. If this article made you think, like this article so the algorithm shows it to people who need to read it. Share this. Every share really helps. Get the word out. Use it. Comment below with your take. Have you ever had someone confidently tell you America is a democracy? Did you correct them? And how did that go? Tell me. And if you want more of this, the data, the history, the science, the stories, join Beaskey's classroom community or follow me on YouTube. Even better, subscribe to my account. It is about the cost of a cup of coffee per month. That is it. Your support keeps this classroom open, and I promise I will never run out of material as long as the left keeps trying to outdumb itself.